Welcome to part 2, AI and consumption. So we've looked at this idea of artificial intelligence and what it is and what it isn't and what it might become. But what does it have to do with consumption? How can we relate it to our consumer practices? And so that's what this second part really focuses on. And so there's two really important ideas that you'll hear all the time, but are crucial to understanding this relationship. One is data and one is algorithms. I like this comic here. I think it's pretty funny. This is the YouTube algorithm. It appears. You want to see a video about a cow hoof? Sure. Aha, right into my trap. Now cow hooves are all you get. Like, that sums it up pretty well. I think of that everyday understanding of what algorithms do. They entrap us in this kind of constant stream of information that they think will target us and fit our desires.
I think that example too is shows how inaccurate they can be. I mean, when I'm looking for material on YouTube to use in class, sociological material, the Frankfurt School and stuff like that, the algorithm wants to feed me alt-right, Jordan
I get
Peterson
this
stuff
all the time,
straight away.
Anything, if you look at a social issue, you get this.
So the way the algorithm works is it's not necessarily based on your previous thing, it's based on what other people are interested in, popularity, it's feeding you things. And again, much of the sociological work around that just shows how biased these things are.
Yeah, it's a great example, actually. So what is data? Data feeds machine learning. That's why it's important. We produce data all the time. I'm sure you hear this. It's common for us as individuals to consent to sharing data, especially as a trade-off for greater access to consumer spaces, both virtual and physical. Mobility, passport, your license, produce data, check-ins, QR codes, which we talked about previously, and convenience. There are good things that come with this. You shouldn't feel like you're some kind of naive dupe for sharing data. It's become a pretty essential part of a human footprint. When you enable data functions on your phone or YouTube or Spotify, the platform learns your preferences and often gives you things that you don't think are that relevant. Some are better than others. There's all kinds of different settings.
Yeah.
So I had on YouTube for a very long time a thing that wouldn't record my preferences, so I got the strangest advertisements.
Right.
Nothing to do with what I'd searched, which would have probably picked out my age and gender, but I get ads to hip replacements and insurance and retirement-focused things.
Google Chrome's desperately trying to sell me my own book at the moment.
That's amazing. Did you buy it?
No, not yet.
You'll crack. You'll crack. So the platform takes your user-generated data and suggests content for you at a basic level by matching tastes with preference according to other users' behavior and with tagged content. Back to pattern matching. Because all AI is really doing is pattern matching, and often those matches are crude.
Yeah, they're homologies rather than factual matches. They can only associate things so much, and the accuracy, therefore, is somewhat dubious.
It's not Steve so much, but an agglomeration of something approximating probably several million individuals.
And then I've clicked on it once, and but
suggesting your book is a pretty accurate read, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Shapes.
Well, not all at once.
Yeah.
It's kind of not really selling. Trying to sell me something I'm not going to buy. Yet it is an accurate read. So that's again a good example of the kind of space here.
Yeah, and if we think back to our kind of mall that's trying to sell us stuff, it's just hoping you get in the door. You're not going to buy something from every shop, but it just hopes there's enough that you'll pass to consume. So it shapes what we consume. It probably doesn't determine it. I wouldn't say it determines what we buy. You can still say no. You can still click off. You can still say no way, right?
That's an important distinction.
But it does shape, right? It puts things in front of your eyes that you may desire. And I think it replaces and complements things that have actually been around for a long time, like targeted marketing, based on meager data that we had before. Someone's address, general demographic profile, age, gender, etc. And surveys or focus groups that was constantly part of marketing. If you were to see this product, what would your feeling be, etc., etc.
Toys have always done it without data, right? Just through gender. Say the boy's product is blue and the girl's.
Yes, exactly. So there's always been labor. There's always been an economy around this. It's just now it happens in ways we don't see as obviously, and we're not exactly sure who the agents are who turn this stuff into something else. Which is part of our anxiety.
And the through-the-door thing with the mall thing I think is interesting too, because the work around what this data and the selling of stuff is about capturing our attention.
Yes.
Attention is what's being sold, but what's being bought here.
Yes, exactly. And that's why it relates so much to consumption, because if you think about for people who like to market products once, and not even that long ago, a decade ago, what we did most of the time was a mystery. But now it can be demonstrated in data what we're doing, what we're paying attention to, so things can target that attention span. It's quite remarkable.
Maybe represented in data rather than demonstrated, because again, it's like only a kind of simulation.
Approximation, yeah. And there are many everyday applications that we also use to generate data, and it's valuable to promote further consumption. So advertising targeted you based on your use of a platform, and we've said this can often be pretty inaccurate or accurate. But what's also important, it's not just that data helps you consume, or products to be targeted to you as a potential consumer. The data itself is consumed. So the data itself is a valuable commodity that can be on-sold, both aggregated and disaggregated, to other companies and for other uses. So this is where you often hear the phrase new data markets, for example, new markets that have grown that want data in different ways.
Yeah. So where some theorists are arguing it's essentially a new form of capitalism. We've moved from product capitalism to information capitalism to this kind of platform capitalism, where it's the data in and of itself that's the thing that capitalism produces as much as things.
Yes. It's the thing it produces, but in the end, it's valuable because it can hopefully help you consume more things,
Even
if you
that's
can master
more data.
it, even if that's more data. Yeah. So data, especially personal data based on taste, preferences, expenditure, demographic details, is incredibly valuable, and it's an important 21st century commodity. So it's not just the data you generate, influences what you consume or how you're targeted to consume. The data itself is an important commodity, especially when pooled with other data, which brings us to big data. So you've often heard this phrase, we live in an age of big data. It's from the journal Big Data in Society. When a journal names itself with a neologism, that's a big sign that it's made it. So what is big data? So this is Rob Kitchen's points. I think that they're great. They sum it up really well. Huge in volume, consisting of terabytes and petabytes of data. High in velocity, so created at near real time, which is quite different to going around to a house, getting a form filled out, transcribing it somewhere, entering that into a database, right? It's like being created now as we speak. We're creating it now. This is a footprint that we're all being part of. I shouldn't say that, people log off. Diverse in variety, structured and unstructured in nature. So it doesn't have to be matching types, right? The inputs don't have to be matching or the same for it to be useful. Exhausting in scope, trying to capture an entire populations or system. So N, the sample, equals everything.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable too how inadequate the reach of data can be. In our imagination, it's all encompassing. But the N all, I think, as we talked about in the last part, the N all has probably increased following COVID because more and more people have had to enroll in data systems who might not have before, only done so partially before. But the N all is still, I would think, a minority of the people in the world.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
It's fine-grained in but of course, later versions. It's always later versions.
Yeah.
Later versions will capture everything. It's fine-grained in resolution and uniquely indexical in identification. So it can be used at a very detailed level, but also can index big things.
So I think if you're interested in the kind of relationship between the exhaustive amount of data and the fine-grained resolution, there's a book called The Predictive Postcode by Richard Webber and Roger Burrows that kind of points out how companies are collecting this data and then profiling us in these really interesting ways. Sometimes seems really stereotypical and relating them to where we live to kind of, again, sell to companies to market stuff.
And here we then see that relationship between data, consumerism,
space
consumption, space, place. And it's relational in nature, containing common fields that enable conjoining of different data sets. So information you got on quite different things can be put together, just as Steve demonstrated. And it's flexible, holding the traits of extensionality, so new things can be added previously. It's kind of will never date kind of thing. And scalability, can expand rapidly in size. And that's really quite a dramatic change in what data is and how it's imagined and how it's utilized. But we can't forget small data. And it's not as if small data is a throwback. Small data is increasingly recognise that it's important, and a lot of scholars will say, don't get carried away with big data. Small data is still commonly used. Obviously, it's much more fine-grained to answer specific research questions and explore in detail varied, contextual, rational, and irrational ways in which people interact and make sense of the world. So despite the rapid growth of big data and associated analytics, small data studies continue to flourish because they capture detail, they capture nuance, and importantly, they capture the rational and the irrational. They capture not just the data imprints that's left, but all the things leading up to it, or that are external to it, or that they might discover that that data generating decision was not really that consequential or matter that much to the people in question. However, the concern is that small data is increasingly more and more pooled, linked, and scaled through new data infrastructures, with an associated drive to try and harmonize small data with respect to data standards, formats, metadata, and documentation in order to increase their value through combination and sharing. So the risk here is that small data gets exposed to incorporation with new multi-billion-dollar data markets. So small data that was collected and gathered for quite sort of research-based things that seem small in scale and specific reasons become aggregated and accessible in big data sets. Yep. That's where people's concerns about their Facebook data being sold to Cambridge Analytica come from. You know, what was essentially small data, pictures of me on my holiday and my communication with friends, gets aggregated, comes out on sold, and comes away as something else on the other side. And that's where people show concern. But small data has a long history in consumer life too, from customer surveys to product testing to screen testing for films to student feedback forms. This is small data that we use to then make decisions from and changes from, etc., etc., etc.
Even kind of political focus groups around elections and issues, and that would be...
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, focus groups, exactly. And, you know, at our shops there was someone talking about different Greens candidate, talking about different things. Small data generation and that kind of thing. So I think the reason I wanted to stress this was just because there's big data doesn't mean small data goes away. They're increasingly linked, but they still have distinctions at certain levels. So if data was the first concept that's important with consumption, the second is algorithms. So in its most basic sense, algorithms are a series of instructions telling a computer how to transform a set of facts about the world into useful information. The facts are data, which we've just talked about, and the useful information is knowledge for people, instructions for machine, or input for yet another algorithm. There are many common examples of algorithms, from sorting sets of numbers to finding routes through maps to displaying information on a screen. There's a really nice conversation article there that just sets it out really clearly what an algorithm is, sort of demystifies the algorithm, but really just a set of instructions. If you think back to when we talked about AI as being autonomous and adaptive, it's that algorithm that gives it that autonomy. Right, a set of instructions. I've given you the instructions, now go away and do it. And adaptive, so that if things change, you don't have to re-instruct. It can follow with a expanding sense of variables and possibilities. That doesn't sound so bad. Just instructions, right? So Matzner's article in Theory, Culture and Society, I think, is a very powerful title. The human is dead. Long live the algorithm. Matzner's point is algorithms are a matter of concern. They take important decisions, promise novel insight into huge troves of data, distribute goods and services, classify persons, potential partner, customer or criminal. Potential partner talking about dating sites and Tinder. You know, an algorithm matching you with a potential partner. Obviously, we've talked about customer and criminal implications, try to detect terrorists, and much, much more. So his point is, not just instructions, the autonomy they use has real-world implications in categorizing and classing people.
One of which is like the practice of redlining, where companies like insurance and health providers and things like this use algorithms to decide, you know, who can and can't get insurance or healthcare or whatever, but like these increasingly map on to already kind of racist geographical segregations that have happened in previous forms of redlining when it came to like real estate, about who was allowed to buy houses in certain spots.
It was viable,
So the algorithm then starts to be deliberately replicating those as a matter of kind of economic efficiency that basically replicates, you know, those racist relations.
And I think what's important too is that the algorithm has a power that seems beyond human fault and rationality. So no matter how bad the data you feed it is, the algorithm generated this, therefore...
They have this kind of connotation of neutrality, which they simply don't have. Algorithms are not neutral.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And so Marston goes on to say that a lot of this is done automatically, reacting to input of smart or intelligent data. So algorithms take positions or functions that used to require humans. or even have been impossible as long as humans were the only intelligent actors. But now algorithms act. They have agency. I mean, this is the big kind of point he's trying to make here. And of course, this leads to all kinds of questions. If algorithms act, how can they be supervised? How can they be governed? Can they be moral? Almost all our sociological concepts of agency have a humanist focus. Some people extend it to other living things, animals, etc., and questions of agency there, but questions of rationality and intent are difficult. But we're generally thinking about living things.
Yep.
But thinking then of algorithms as acting, and those actions have consequences, really challenges what it means to be human if we want to follow it far.
Yeah, it challenges how humans relate to each other as well. I mean, the robo-debt example that happened over the last couple of years, where there was an algorithm used to kind of ring people up on welfare to say, you owe $12,000 in half, many of instances, I think the majority of them were incorrect. This led people to be like, have a huge amount of stress and anxiety. In fact, there seems to be some actual suicides that resulted from this thing.
And imagine, that's wrong. No, the algorithm has said we have data that says.
So it allows kind of dehumanistic kind of use of these kind of power relations, where in the past that would have been at least some kind of relation between a Centrelink worker and the Centrelink attendee. There could be some kind of transaction, some kind of care.
Some kind of negotiation, like, please just, I'll show you this, just give me time.
This is wrong. Yeah.
And that's what people really fear, is that loss of a relationship.
Yeah. The loss of negotiation or care, or even relation, some kind of relationality where you have some kind of communication or conversation. That's what it means to be a human, right?
A lot of people have talked about this in drones, for example. Soldier comes into the village, you can walk out with your hands up and say, "Don't shoot," and they might listen.
Yeah.
But a drone won't.
A drone doesn't do that.
Yeah. And that's probably the most stark example of the consequences of that difference.
Yeah. And the people that die are just rendered collateral damage in that sense. Yeah.
Data for other. It's actually pretty awful. So that doesn't sound so bad. It sounds awful.
Yeah.
So one of the readings that we wanted you to look at was Burrell and Fourcade's reading. It's really, really interesting about the social implications of all of this, and they talk about shifting to a society of algorithms. I think what's great about the article is that it tries to identify the phenomena that are actually going on. Here, break it down a little bit. I think what's really fascinating is this idea of the coding elite. It's a great quote. The new elite occupies the upper echelons of the digitized society, a class or proto-class of software developers, tech CEOs, investors, and computer science and engineering professors, among others, often circulating effortlessly between these influential roles. Most valued in this world are those people who touch and understand computer code. Most powerful are those who own the code and can employ others to deploy it as they see fit.
And are mostly buttressed from any of the negative things that come from this.
They're just innovators.
Yeah.
They're just innovators. They're pioneering, right? And we even see it a lot, even in, say, a university setting, where we fetishize these people who can come and show us how to do things more efficiently, touch things more efficiently. We can the past no longer matters. It's this, and this. So even in areas where you think that developing human capabilities are its fundamental business, we still see this kind of fetishization of the coding elite all the time, actually. The other phenomenon they talk about are cross-domain implementations. So they say education, medicine, credit and finance, and criminal justice. You could add all kinds of things to that. Border control, weapons, welfare services. So a whole lot of really discrete areas of society have codes developed that cross over and bring information together, obviously with kind of catastrophic consequences in much of the time. And this changes the way people interact, associate and think, their subjectivities, which we've talked about subjectivities before, and as you've been studying sociology, you will be familiar with the term. But the idea that this changes people's subjectivities is I think, important, actually, and quite powerful. That our subjectivity was often determined by our citizenship, for example, and our rights-bearing citizenship, and then these other factors that influenced our place within that society. Whereas the point here is that algorithms are changing that subjectivity. We're now beholden to all kinds of things we can't see or control, but they're telling us where we fit in society and our worth.
So an oversimplified kind of trajectory there is like from subjectivity as a citizen to a consumer now to like being a kind of assemblage of data.
Yes, that's a great, yeah. Citizen, consumer,
data.
Code, and what I really like is I think what they say, which I think many of us think, is that why? Like, why do we need a computer that can write poetry? Why do we need an artificially intelligent robot to help sort information about who's a good worker and who's not? Why do we need all of this? Yeah. And they kind of give an answer that is, maybe we don't, but this coding elite drives it. The end game of this coding elite, the ultimate goal of their professional project, like the algorithms they build, remains opaque. We actually don't know why. Yet I often hear it in Barcelona University. In 5 years, that job's not going to no longer exist, but we can control whether that happens or not, right? Like, why? It's this idea that something is so autonomous and out of control that anything it can replace must be worthless to begin with, or it wouldn't be able to be replaced.
Yeah. So again, it relates to that techno-utopian kind of thing that we've talked about in other things as well. That
yeah.
Like this technology is just a good force making everything better, and therefore just kind of get on board, or you're a Luddite or a communist or something. yeah.
Okay, and then. That's a couple of things. The Whyte reading is interesting. It talks about deepfakes, and I think deepfakes draw on our deepest fear of AI. And why they do is because we lose that ability to distinguish between the human and the non-human, between the human and the robot, right? And that's a long human fear.
Between fact and fiction.
Between fact and fiction, yeah. So AI-enabled disinformation is an everyday foil to the normal information consumption of the average democratic citizen. It's a really good way to think about it. We talked a lot about it in the alt-right. There's a Roger Burrows, I linked there to a 1 hour Roger Burrows lecture that's really fascinating on the algorithms that power the alt-right and why they show up in so many places, what triggers them, how they end up following on from, say, factual news. It's very, very fascinating, and I really encourage you to watch it. There's also a really nice article from Rose Gray in The Atlantic, just talking about deepfakes and why they're such a popular phenomenon and why people produce them in the first place, right? What's interesting is that they've become a mass-produced regular feature of the information environment in democracies, and this could well add to the sort of entertainment environment of them. It's interesting in terms of elections still, that there's so much capacity to produce misinformation and propaganda and all these kinds of things, yet the media still follow politicians around as they go and meet people and wait for them to slip up and whatever. And so it's this and thing again we talked about, not replacing but coexisting alongside in really strange ways.
Yeah. So I suppose the morals of these things kind of then relate to like who's being used and abused or targeted, right? So I can have sympathy with a deep fake that kind of takes the piss out of a politician, a powerful figure. Not so much, say, when there's a deep fake used as some kind of revenge porn on a kind of, dude that's upset that he broke up with his girlfriend or something, right? So, the kind of continuity of, like, contours of inequality that has always existed are kind of become, like, equally as important to think about the way these things work.
And I think that deep fear is, I didn't say that. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
But this is probably the ultimate weapon to say, yes, you did. There's a video of it. There's evidence. There's evidence. And so how this then changes how people prove innocence, guilt, how they respond to accusations, hate speech claims. It's very challenging to our subjectivities, actually. Finally, I really encourage you to look at the sort of next world of algorithms and AI. There's often been a claim that creativity is the domain of the thinking human, that artificial intelligence can never match that or mimic that. Again, why people create programs that can write poems, I don't know. Life's hard enough for poets. Don't make them compete with robots. But there's a really fascinating NPR article here that compares poems written by robots and poems written by poets, and you've got to see if you can tell which is which. You should take the test, should get some friends to take it and see how you scored. I scored poorly.